Maya had always been invisible in her husband's world, never invited to his events, never part of the life he shared with others. But one night everything changed. She walked into a party, and in an instant all eyes turned to her. The room fell silent, and her husband, he couldn't look away. But the real question is, why had he kept her in the shadows for so long? And what happens when the woman who's been hidden finally steps into the light? If Maya's story hit you in the feels, don't forget to smash that subscribe button, join the conversation, and drop a comment. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Hit that bell to stay updated. Maya stood at the edge of the party, her heart pounding in her chest. The laughter and chatter from inside the room sounded distant, muffled behind the thick door. For a moment she hesitated. Was she really doing this? The sudden surge of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. She glanced over at Darren, standing just a few feet away, his back to her. He was talking to a group of people, laughing, completely unaware of the storm swirling inside her. It was strange, this feeling of being both so close to him, yet so far. She hadn't even expected the invitation. Darren, who had always kept her at arm's length, suddenly suggested they go to this party together. For years he had kept her hidden. The work events, the social gatherings, the parties, those were all places she was never part of. It wasn't that he didn't love her, she thought. He did. He said he did. But love wasn't enough when it came to the world he lived in. His world was different. And hers? Well, hers didn't quite fit, not in the way he needed it to. Maya had never questioned it. She had spent so many years waiting, accepting the silent rejection, knowing that Darren's life outside their apartment had always been more important than the one they shared. It hurt, but she kept quiet. She believed for a long time that this was just how it was. She tried not to mind. She'd make the best of it. She was patient. After all, there were times when Darren seemed to care, when his affection would shine through and make her feel loved again. But those moments were fleeting, and each one felt like a lie she had to convince herself to believe. But tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't hiding in the shadows. Tonight she wasn't playing the role of the forgotten wife. She was here, out in the open, standing at the door about to step into his world that had never once felt like hers. She took a deep breath, pushing the doubt aside, and with one final glance at Darren, she opened the door and stepped into the room. Immediately everything shifted. The noise seemed to fade, like the room had gone still and all eyes were on her. She stood there for a second, trying to steady herself as people continued to talk and laugh, except now the energy had changed. The stares were not warm, not welcoming. They were cold, uncertain. Some people looked away, quickly pretending they hadn't noticed her. Others couldn't help but watch, their eyes lingering just a moment too long. And Darren? He hadn't even noticed her entrance. He was still engaged in his conversation, his back turned toward her. Maya stood there, rooted to the spot, a wave of self-doubt crashing over her. Why had she come? Why had she agreed to this? She had always known she was different in Darren's world, but the reality of it stung. This wasn't just the subtle exclusion she'd gotten used to over the years. This was open. This was real. She glanced around, trying to make sense of the situation. She wanted to find a friendly face, someone who would make her feel like she belonged. But there was nothing. Just more cold stares and quiet whispers behind cupped hands. As the minutes stretched on, she felt smaller and smaller. The air seemed to grow thicker with every passing second, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into a world where she wasn't welcome. After what seemed like an eternity, a woman approached her. Maya forced herself to smile, but it felt tight, forced. The woman was tall, impeccably dressed, with perfect skin and a sharp, calculating smile. She extended her hand, her fingers lightly brushing Maya's. "Hello," the woman said with a smooth, almost rehearsed voice. "You must be Maya. I've heard so much about you." Maya nodded, trying to hold back the nervousness she felt rising in her chest. "Yes, that's me." The woman's eyes scanned her, the glance lingering a little longer than necessary. "It's so nice to finally meet the mysterious wife." Her tone was light, almost mocking. "I didn't expect you to be so, well. You know," Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. Her smile faltered, but she kept it in place, unsure of what to say. What did the woman mean by you know? She had heard enough microaggressions in her life to recognize the tone. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an interest in who she was. It was a judgment wrapped up in the guise of politeness. The woman's eyes twinkled as she continued. "I mean, Darren's always so private, you know, but you're different. I guess that's what makes you interesting." Maya swallowed hard, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Different. Was that all she was to these people? Just an exotic curiosity, a mystery? She wanted to say something, to speak out, but the words caught in her throat. This was Darren's world, and she apparently didn't belong in it. Before she could respond, the woman turned on her heel, walking back into the crowd with a casual, almost dismissive wave. Maya stood there, once again invisible in the sea of strangers. The music was louder now, the chatter more distant. She felt disconnected, out of place. And still, Darren didn't notice. He was still laughing, still lost in his world, oblivious to the hurt that was settling in her chest. She felt it then all at once, the betrayal, the isolation, the hurt she had buried for so long. This wasn't just about not being invited to parties. It wasn't just about being the one who stayed at home while he went off to socialize. This was about something deeper. This was about the way she had been kept in the background, hidden away like something to be ashamed of. But it wasn't just Darren. It was the entire room, the people who looked at her as if she didn't belong. The people who, without saying a word, had made her feel small, less than, like she didn't deserve to be there. It was racism, subtle, insidious, but present in every glance, every whispered word. And in that moment, Maya realized something. Darren wasn't the only one who had kept her hidden. She had allowed herself to be hidden. She had let herself shrink into the background, to remain quiet, to accept the scraps of affection and respect she was given. But not anymore, not tonight. Maya's mind raced as she stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes darting around the room, taking in every glance, every shift in posture. She felt exposed, like everyone was looking at her. No, not looking at her, but judging her, sizing her up. She could almost hear their thoughts. Who is she? What is she doing here? The weight of it pressed down on her, suffocating her, and yet she couldn't leave. She couldn't escape. It wasn't just the people in the room that made her feel small. It was Darren, too. He was so far removed, so lost in his own world. She'd always been there in the background, watching as he moved through his life, his friends, his colleagues, his social circles, while she stayed quiet, waiting for him to see her, waiting for him to acknowledge that she too existed. But tonight, that waiting had stopped. Tonight, she could feel the walls closing in, the crushing reality of everything she had ignored for years. Darren was no longer just a man she loved. He was a symbol of everything she had accepted, his indifference, his neglect, his refusal to let her step into the light. The way he stood there, laughing with his friends, oblivious to everything that had happened in the room, oblivious to her pain, was the final straw. She tried to push the thoughts out of her mind, tried to ignore the growing lump in her throat, but it was impossible. She had spent too many years as a spectator in her own life, and tonight she couldn't pretend anymore. With a deep breath, Maya turned and walked through the crowd, her footsteps deliberate. She could feel their eyes on her, some curious, some judgmental, others cold and uninterested. But this time she didn't care. She didn't care what they thought. She was done. Darren was still across the room, laughing, chatting as though nothing had changed. As though she hadn't just walked into his life, into his world, and felt every ounce of rejection, every ounce of judgment. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached him. There was no turning back now. She had to confront this. She had to confront him. As she walked closer, Darren turned, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. He smiled, that smile she had always loved, the one that had made her believe that maybe, just maybe, he truly did care about her. But when he saw the look on her face, that smile faltered. His expression changed, confusion flickering across his features. "Maya," he said, his voice low, almost uncertain. "What's wrong?" She couldn't hold it in anymore. The words tumbled out faster than she could stop them. "What's wrong? Darren, what's wrong is that you've never seen me, you've never seen who I am. You've kept me hidden away from your world like I'm something to be ashamed of." Her voice shook with emotion, but she didn't care. "I've been standing in your shadow for years, letting you keep me in the background, never asking why. I've spent all this time pretending it didn't hurt, pretending it didn't matter." Darren opened his mouth to say something, but Maya cut him off. "You never brought me to your work events, to your parties. You never made me a part of your life. You made me feel invisible, Darren. You made me feel like I wasn't worthy of being seen by the people who were supposed to care about me." There was a pause, the silence hanging heavy between them. Darren's face was a mixture of shock and guilt, but also confusion. He didn't understand. He didn't get it. How could he? He had never had to live with the weight of being invisible in the world they lived in. He had never been the one who was overlooked, ignored, treated like an afterthought. Maya swallowed hard, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. "And tonight I thought maybe things would be different. I thought maybe if I just showed up, if I just stepped into your world, things would change. But nothing changed. You still acted like I didn't matter, like I wasn't even here. And I'm done. I'm done pretending, Darren. I'm done pretending that I'm okay with being invisible." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't care. She was shaking now, her emotions raw and exposed. She was no longer hiding. She had been invisible for too long, and now she was done. She was done with the silence, done with the shame. Darren took a step forward, his hand reaching for her. "Maya, wait, please, you don't understand. I never meant for you to feel like this. No," she interrupted, her voice firm now. "You don't get it. It's not about what you meant to do, Darren. It's about what you actually did. It's about how you made me feel. I've spent so long hiding in the background of your life, trying to convince myself that this was love, that this was enough. But it wasn't, and it isn't." Darren recoiled, a pained expression on his face. He had never seen her like this, had never heard her speak like this. The woman standing before him wasn't the woman who had silently accepted his neglect. This woman was strong. This woman was demanding to be seen. "I don't know what to say, Maya," he said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you." Maya's heart broke at the words, but she didn't let herself soften. She couldn't, not this time. "Love isn't enough, Darren, not when you keep someone hidden away, not when you make them feel like they don't belong. I'm done being your secret. I deserve more than that." The silence between them felt like an eternity, but it was broken by the sound of someone clearing their throat. Maya turned and saw that the room had gone silent. Every person in the room was watching them, their eyes darting back and forth between her and Darren. The reality of the moment hit her. It wasn't just Darren she was confronting, it was the entire world that had treated her as if she didn't belong. She had spent too long in silence, too long allowing others to define her place in the world. But not anymore. With one final glance at Darren, Maya turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the man she thought she knew and the world that had kept her hidden. She didn't know what came next, but she knew this. She wasn't going to shrink anymore, not for anyone. Maya's footsteps echoed through the hallway as she walked away from the party, each step a release of the burden she had carried for so long. The cool night air hit her face as she pushed through the door, but it didn't offer the comfort she'd hoped for. The freedom she had fought for still felt strange, as if it were something she had only just discovered. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. All that mattered was that she was no longer standing in the shadows, no longer letting Darren or anyone else dictate her worth. She had stepped into the light, and though the pain was raw and the weight of everything heavy, she knew she had done the right thing. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that made everything feel more real. She walked aimlessly, her thoughts spiraling, her mind racing with the moment she'd just left behind. She had confronted Darren, the man who had promised to love her, to protect her, and yet he had failed her. Not once, not twice, but every single day for years. The reality of that stung, harder than anything else. It wasn't just the events she had been excluded from, the times she had been ignored, it was everything. It was how Darren had always made her feel like an afterthought, a side note in a life she was supposed to share with him. And it wasn't just Darren, it was the world they lived in, the world that had treated her and so many others as less than. She had been a part of it all, accepting the treatment, accepting the way things were, even though deep down she knew it wasn't right. But what choice did she have? She was one person and he was the man she loved. But tonight had changed that. Tonight she had made a decision. No more silence. No more being ignored. No more living in the shadows. The weight of those words hung heavy in the air as she walked, each step making her feel a little lighter, a little more free. But even as the initial relief set in, a part of her felt broken. Her heart ached for the man she had loved, for the life they had built together, even if it wasn't the life she'd hoped for. And yet something else began to surface, a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long. Hope. Hope that she could still reclaim herself, that she could still build a life that was truly her own, free from the chains of someone else's expectations. She wasn't defined by her relationship with Darren, and she wasn't defined by the world that tried to diminish her. She was Maya. And for the first time, Maya was choosing to be seen. As she continued walking, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stopped, hesitating for a moment before pulling it out. The name on the screen made her heart skip. It was Darren. Part of her wanted to throw the phone away, to walk away from it all and never look back. But another part of her, one that still cared, one that still hoped, opened the message. "Maya, please, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please come back, let's talk." She stared at the message, the weight of it pressing down on her. She had imagined this moment in so many ways, but now that it was here, it didn't feel the way she expected. She had spent so many years wondering if he loved her, wondering if he cared. But now all she could see were the years of neglect, the moments when he had chosen the world over her, when he had kept her hidden in plain sight. She typed a response, her fingers moving slowly over the screen as she chose her words carefully. "I can't keep doing this, Darren. I've been invisible for too long. I can't pretend that I don't matter. I can't pretend that I'm okay with being treated like I'm nothing. I need to find out who I am without you, without hiding. I'm sorry." She pressed send before she could second-guess herself, staring at the screen as the message went through. A part of her felt relief, but another part, one that had spent so many years in this relationship, felt like she was breaking something, like she was walking away from the person she had built her life with. But as the message sent, she knew it was the right thing to do. She had to choose herself. She had to choose freedom, even if it came at the cost of the relationship she had fought so hard to make work. She couldn't keep hiding behind someone else's version of love. She had to step into her own. The next few days were a blur. Maya spent most of them in silence, trying to process everything that had happened. She didn't go back to the apartment. Instead, she rented a small place of her own, a space that felt like hers, where she could be alone with her thoughts, with her grief, with her anger, but also with the realization that she was finally taking control. As the days passed, the ache of leaving Darren began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. She started to see the ways she had allowed herself to be small, to be silenced. She realized that the love she had been searching for had always been within her reach, that she had always been worthy of being seen, of being loved the right way. And as much as she missed Darren, the man she had loved for so long, she realized that she couldn't keep waiting for him to change. She couldn't keep hoping that he would see her for who she truly was. He had failed her, and now it was time for her to stand up for herself, to stand up for the person she had been all along. She wasn't sure what came next. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she was no longer willing to hide. She was no longer willing to let anyone define her worth. The world had treated her as invisible for too long, but now it was her turn to be seen. And for the first time in years, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The kind of hope that came from knowing that she was enough just as she was, and that no one, not even Darren, could ever take that away from her. Maya didn't hear from Darren again. The silence that followed was both deafening and comforting. There were no more messages, no more calls, no more apologies. It was as if the world had shifted, and in its place, Maya found herself standing alone but not lonely. She had never been so sure of herself in her entire life. She knew, deep down, that walking away had been the only choice for her. It wasn't just about leaving Darren. It was about leaving behind everything that had made her feel invisible. The days turned into weeks, and Maya found herself carving out a new life. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of everything, of the life she had left behind, threatened to pull her under. But each time she found herself rising, stronger than before. She spent her mornings walking in the park, enjoying the fresh air, the quiet moments that she had once longed for. The nights were spent reflecting, journaling her thoughts, learning to heal. She didn't need to hide anymore. One afternoon, she sat in a cafe, sipping her coffee, staring out the window as the world moved by. It felt surreal. The life she had spent so long waiting for was finally beginning to take shape, and for the first time in years, it was her life. Not Darren's, not anyone else's, just hers. But even as she settled into this new rhythm, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. Maya had been part of something much larger than her relationship with Darren. The emotional scars she carried weren't just from him. They were from a world that had always treated her as less than, from a world that had normalized racism, exclusion, and the erasure of black women's voices. Darren was only one part of the story. The real story, the one that needed to be told, was about how this kind of treatment wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, every person who had ever been pushed to the margins simply because of who they were. Maya had lived it. She had experienced the subtle, everyday racism that never seemed to end. The way people looked at her differently, the way she had been treated like a token, like a curiosity, like someone who didn't fit in no matter how hard she tried. But this wasn't just about the moments that Darren had ignored her. This was about the broader culture that had conditioned him, and so many others, to believe that people like Maya weren't worth seeing, worth celebrating. As Maya reflected on everything that had happened, she realized that leaving Darren wasn't just an act of self-preservation. It was a stand against everything that had tried to silence her. It was a declaration that she would no longer accept the world's attempts to make her invisible. She was ready to share her story with others, to speak out about the subtle violence of exclusion, about the impact of racism that wasn't always loud and obvious, but just as damaging. One day, as she was walking down the street, Maya saw a flyer for a community gathering aimed at raising awareness about racism and the erasure of black voices. It was a small event, but it felt like a sign. A chance to be part of something bigger. She hadn't planned on going, but something tugged at her, a sense of purpose, a pull that she couldn't ignore. That night, Maya stood in a room full of strangers, all of them united by a common cause: to shed light on the injustices that permeated their lives, to share their stories, and to work toward change. As she listened to the speakers, as she heard their voices, Maya felt a deep sense of belonging that she hadn't felt in years. Here in this room, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't a side note. She was part of something larger than herself. When it was her turn to speak, Maya felt a rush of emotions flood her. She hadn't shared her story with anyone outside of her closest circle. But here, in this space, surrounded by people who understood her pain, she knew she could no longer stay silent. She stepped up to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly but her voice strong. "I've spent a long time being invisible," she began. "I've spent a long time pretending that being in the shadows didn't hurt, but it does. It hurts to feel like you don't belong, to feel like you're something that needs to be hidden, like you're not worthy of the same love and respect as everyone else. I've been there, and I'm here to tell you, we are worthy, we are seen, and we will not let the world erase us anymore." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. And then, slowly, people began to clap. The applause wasn't just for her. It was for every person in that room who had ever felt invisible, who had ever been told they didn't belong. It was for every woman who had been pushed aside, every person of color who had been made to feel small. That night, Maya didn't just reclaim her voice, she reclaimed her power. She realized that her journey wasn't just about her, it was about something bigger. It was about making sure that no one else had to feel the way she had felt, about building a world where people of color, especially black women, were no longer pushed to the margins. It was about demanding to be seen. And as she left that gathering, Maya knew that her journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. There was still so much work to be done, so many stories to be told, so many battles to fight. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready. She was no longer hidden. She was no longer invisible. Maya had stepped into the light, and now there was no going back. Maya didn't just stop with reclaiming her voice, she took action. She found herself marching in protests for racial justice, standing alongside others who were fighting for the same rights, the same dignity, the same recognition. The streets were alive with the energy of people demanding change, their voices rising together in unity. Maya stood in the middle of it all, holding a sign high, her face determined, her eyes focused on the future. This was the world she wanted to be a part of, a world where no one had to shrink to fit in, where no one had to be silent to be accepted. With every step she took, she could feel her power growing. The solidarity of the crowd was overwhelming, and for the first time, Maya felt that the fight was not hers alone. She was no longer standing in the shadows. She was on the front lines, fighting for every person who had ever been made to feel invisible. As time passed, Maya began to mentor and speak to young women of color, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to find their voices, too. One evening, she stood in front of a small group, the room filled with young women who had stories similar to hers, stories of being overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. Maya's heart swelled with emotion as she spoke to them, her words resonating with a newfound confidence. "You are not invisible," she told them. "You are seen. You are worthy, and it's time to stop waiting for the world to give you space. Create your own." The women in the room listened intently, their eyes wide, some even wiping away tears. Maya saw herself in them, their pain, their confusion, their hopes. And now she could see the possibility for them to rise just as she had. Her voice was a beacon for them, a reminder that no one should ever have to stay in the background. She was giving them the courage to step into the light just as she had done. Maya's voice began to be heard on a larger scale. She was invited to speak at panels and discussions about racial inequality, her words a mixture of personal experience and raw truth. As she stood in front of an audience, she spoke passionately about the invisible barriers that black women faced in society, the microaggressions, the biases, and the constant battle for visibility and respect. Her hands moved as she spoke, emphasizing her points, and the audience was captivated. Maya wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had been silenced, for everyone who had been told they didn't matter. The room was silent, absorbing every word, and in that silence, Maya knew she had made an impact. She was no longer the woman who had been hidden. She was now a powerful voice for change, a woman who would not stop until the world saw her for who she truly was. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya stood on a rooftop, alone but filled with a sense of peace. The city stretched out before her, the lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. She had come so far from the woman who had once been afraid to step into the light. The shadows no longer had power over her. As the last rays of sunlight bathed her in golden warmth, Maya allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had faced the darkest parts of herself, the parts she had tried to hide for so long. And now she was free, free to be who she truly was, free to fight for the future she believed in. The horizon before her was full of possibilities, full of hope. And for the first time, Maya felt like she was standing exactly where she was meant to be. The final step of her journey was one of self-acceptance. Maya stood in front of a mirror, looking at the woman who stared back at her. She had been through so much, faced so many battles, but here she was, strong, confident, and unapologetically herself. She smiled at her reflection, the smile not just of happiness, but of pride. Pride in the woman she had become. Pride in the courage she had found. She had embraced every part of herself, the parts she had once tried to hide, the parts that had been ignored, the parts that were once invisible. Now she saw herself clearly, and for the first time she felt at peace with who she was. Maya knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready. She had stepped into her own light, and nothing would ever make her shrink again.